All right. Hey, everyone. I'm Yves. I'm the CEO of Fieldwire, and I'm here today with Tom Strong. Tom, we've known you for many years while you were the CTO of Ediston, one of Canada's largest general contractor. You're now the president and CEO of CanBIM, a nonprofit focused on construction technology in Canada, probably the largest organization like that in Canada, and the founder of Wired Construction, which you describe as being a CTO for hire. Can you maybe tell us a bit more actually about Wired Construction?
Yeah, so I mean, I like you mentioned, I spent a lot of time working in a big organization focused on technology and innovation, and I just see an opportunity to really help out smaller companies. Thinking about their not only just their technology stack and the decisions they're making around technology, but how that works with their business processes and their people. So the intent isn't to sort of attack the world and service 1,000 clients, but more I want to have meaningful engagements with a handful of companies at a time, and flesh out a team and really help construction companies navigate all the complexity around all the technology that's now available to help them create efficiencies for their work.
Yeah, I mean that makes a ton of sense. I mean, changing organization takes time, and I think the change management part often is equally hard as picking the right technology. So
culture is the hardest part. You gotta win over the hearts and minds. And there's a lot of people in the workforce that like what they do. And, construction doesn't allow for just the way the industry works. There's not a lot of money around to invest in R&D and retooling and rethinking the way you work. You kind of move from project to project. And I think the relationships are now changing. The companies are getting larger. The projects are getting larger and more complex, so you need a certain level of sophistication just to operate in the industry. But companies need to keep cash on hand to have bonding capacity, and they don't have the money to invest in R&D, so they haven't had the opportunity to kind of retool and add technology to enhance what they're doing. So I've had the luxury of working in a really large, sophisticated general contractor and helping to make decisions around those strategies. And that's something that I'm excited about being able to bring to the rest of the market.
That's really interesting. So when you talk about culture, what is usually the biggest argument around investing in technology and helping people move forward in that direction?
I think it's not even getting an argument is great. I mean, if you can get an argument, then at least people are listening and there's a debate, and, the best decisions are going to come out of arguments. It's when people won't even come to the table to have a discussion about change, because they've got their heads down and they're extremely busy and what they do is profitable or whatever the case is. And they're not thinking, over the horizon at all. So that's kind of the challenge, just getting people out of their comfort zone with their existing sort of mindsets and having them come to the table. I think once you can have these discussions with companies, and once you can kind of identify the kind of sticks in the mud, like you can kind of work with them. And then once they're exposed to what's possible, like the lights go on, like a product like Fieldwire, if you have a superintendent that's, used to having a roll of drawings under their arm and rolling around the job site with information that's maybe like 2 months out of date, and all of a sudden you give them the opportunity to have access to current information in real time, the lights go on, they get it, they want it, and now they become the champion within their organization moving forward. So, I kind of enjoy that part of it, like bringing innovation to people and having them engage with it and start to drive it on their own, like seeing that curve, like that's a lot of fun.
I mean, arguably that's one of the silver lining of the current situation where COVID-19 can be used as a reason for companies to adapt or develop on the technology side, and I guess we'll get back to that in a second. One of the interesting things is, so you're based in Toronto. Maybe we haven't talked too much about the construction situation in Canada right now. So what are you seeing? What's the situation up there?
Well, Toronto's I'm pretty sure it's the busiest construction market in North America right now. I think there's I don't know. I've heard this stat, and I'm probably gonna get it totally wrong. I don't know if you have a fact checker on board there with your podcast, but I think there's more cranes up in Toronto than New York, Miami, and Chicago combined. Like, Toronto is extremely busy. There's a shortage of office space. There's a shortage of housing. There's a lot of infrastructure underway there. So it's an extremely busy market, and there's demands for housing to be built. There's demands for transportation systems to be built. So this kind of disruption obviously is not welcome for productivity. It's going to slow things down certainly, but the job sites are still open. Like just recently, the government they've been slowly reducing what they're describing as essential workplaces, right? So just recently they put a lot more restrictions on construction. And what we're seeing now is that if you're working on a healthcare project, obviously, if you're working on any kind of healthcare related project where you're manufacturing, say, pharmaceuticals or medical equipment, obviously those projects are going to continue to move forward. And then anything that's essential infrastructure as it relates to transportation or anything related, industrial related to petrochemical that would keep society operating, those things are deemed essential. Residential projects, if you have a existing permit, then you're allowed to continue working on that project, but they're not going to be issuing any new permits for any kind of residential projects. So it's interesting, and there's a lot of public debate about this. I mean, obviously, safety is number one priority for all builders, and this creates a new level of complexity to consider on a job site. Construction is a hazardous activity on the best days, and there's all sorts of things in place to try to reduce workplace injuries, et cetera. But now you have this extra factor of infectious disease control, and it creates a huge challenge. Like if you're thinking about sequencing, you have to think about your workers as or your teams as groups that you want to keep separated in time and space, so that you can control infections. And there's also a requirement, I was reading up on the requirements in Ontario, and there's actually a requirement for builders to track where their workers are and where they have been, so that in the event that someone gets infected, they can actually go backwards in time and understand where they were. So I'm kind of curious to see what kind of technology products emerge. Like, for example, Fieldwire could potentially have some of that data already, but it's not being used, right? So there's definitely some opportunities to think about the use of technology as it relates to tracking workers and understanding if there's many kind of transmittal opportunities for these hazardous diseases. So overall, I think it's certainly not business as usual. I think there's going to be the other shoe to drop here is going to be supply chain. The borders are a lot more restricted. So if you have a long lead item like an air handling unit that maybe is getting manufactured down in the U.S. somewhere, getting that equipment across the border is going to be challenging, if not impossible, and that's obviously going to have an effect on your critical path of your project. So there's definitely going to be some other issues. And then just generally, I mentioned when we were chatting earlier, like just going to Home Depot now, they were letting you in the store, but you had to wait in a long line, and they only let 50 people in at once. And now they won't even let you in. They block you at the door, and you have to wait outside. And a runner basically runs and gets you what you need. So these types of things are going to slow the industry right down. And it'll be interesting to. What I'm curious to see what happens is how it affects existing contracts. Like if you have a major disruption like this. I think a lot of these major infrastructure projects are already behind schedule, so maybe this is going to give the contractors a bit of ammunition to argue for some extra time, but it's certainly going to slow the industry down.
I mean, I think that's actually a good transition. I do wonder whether policy is going to allow contractors to renegotiate contracts. We're seeing that happens in very strange fields. So for example, right now, rental contracts for office space in San Francisco, potentially they're going to allow you to break long-term lease because you've not been able to use the spaces. So that would be a crazy saying, like you could get out of a 10-year lease if you wanted that you've already signed. So it's very early, we're tracking it, but there's potentially some movement there. So you were saying that the volume of activity is going down, which is, I think, expected. What are you seeing companies do maybe with that extra capacity that they have? Are you seeing them adapt on the technology side, or are you seeing them just make specific steps on the technology front to adapt to the situation?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a mix. I mean, depending on the size of the organization and, you know, how much cash they have on hand and what their burn rate that is, that sort of thing. Like definitely the bigger companies, they compete so hard to get the best people. I don't expect that they're going to lay people off, even if they're slowing down, just because it's so hard to get those good people in the first place. And definitely technology is supporting people working from home in our industry. It really always has. I mean, you can really have, you know, all of your site workers work remotely, except for the people that actually need to physically be on site. But the bigger companies are going to, you know, they're going to transition to a more of a virtual workplace. They're going to be using technology like this for having meetings and whatnot. Smaller companies that have to shut down their sites entirely, there's going to be impact. Like people are going to be laid off, unfortunately. But I do think the economy is going to come kind of roaring back, which is good. It'll be good when that happens, but it also creates a bit of a premium for everything at that point, because now you're working overtime and whatnot. So it's kind of the whole thing's obviously it's not good for anybody, but the bigger companies are going to be relying on technology a lot more. I think the downtime is going to allow them to kind of retool and rethink their strategy as it relates to technology. And maybe this is an opportunity to move things forward and think about innovation. And, you know, the market's been so busy that when you're busy, you're kind of busy doing busy work and not thinking strategically necessarily and thinking about how to improve. So this is an opportunity where potentially things are going to get a little bit more lean. There's going to be a little bit more competition. There's going to be more emphasis on efficiency. And I think companies are going to be thinking about, you know, their technology stack and potentially the absence of any kind of technology in a lot of these companies. Like a lot of companies are still working off Excel and whatnot. So yeah, there's definitely an opportunity with some extra time to rethink how you're operating and explore, you know, new tools and processes, and you know, want to make use of that time while you're stuck at home.
Tom, we were talking earlier, you mentioned Excel, and we were talking earlier how even this call, like we're using you know, a video sharing tool, and it's kind of second nature to us, but for some people in construction who are now huddling, you know, in a virtual meeting as opposed to on the job site, it's a change. What are some of the simple things that you would recommend from a technology standpoint that people in construction could literally start doing this week to help with the productivity side?
Well, I think you have obviously pointed out the number one thing a general contractor does is communicate. That's their job, right? Their job is to take information from one entity, pass it to the other entity, make sure they understand it, and then, you know, manage the flow of communication between all the stakeholders over the course of the project. So, you know, as a contractor, you've got to be like excellent at communication. And like, I can remember when I was a coordinator in the field, like early 2000s, kind of seemed like that long ago, but you know, we were using GoToMeeting and like crushing 50 meetings a day, having like 5-minute meetings. So, you know, I was dealing with an architect down in California at the time, and we didn't book meetings. We just had meetings back to back, online meetings as necessary. And this virtual technology is not, it's not new. I mean, as a coordinator, this is one of your number one tools, to be able to share a screen with someone and quickly resolve an issue, and then follow up with an email that is a record of that solution, right? So I think virtual meetings is a huge thing. I think any kind of common data environment platform that would allow you to share information across your project teams is essential. You're going to have, you know, if you have people still active on construction sites, they need current information. They need to be able to communicate fluidly with the office and all the other stakeholders that are potentially working from home. So having a robust system that can like host your documents and manage your document control in the cloud, like Fieldwire, I think is essential. I mean, that is also not a new concept, but it's really best practices now. Like, you know, if contractors don't have a strategy in place to manage their digital information centrally in the cloud, that's an area you certainly got to focus on. And then there's a whole bunch of other peripheral systems that work on the same concept. You know, like sophisticated project management tools to manage workflow of communication, et cetera. That's very important. And then the other trends, like, around, a better connection between the three-dimensional geometry of the building and layout of the field. These things aren't going away, and that's an area that needs to be, if you're in charge of installing a complex system in the field, your business should be focused on working proactively to fully coordinate the geometry of what you're going to install on the job site in advance of arriving on the job site. Mm-hmm. And then you need the same level of sophistication on the site to lay out these systems on site to match what you've pre-engineered. So these are important strategies. They're not new things, but they're things that companies are at different levels of maturity with. And then I think the other big trend that I'm seeing is overall productization of the industry. We're seeing a trend away from sort of providing a service, like where an architect provides a service to do design, or a general contractor provides a service to manage construction. We're seeing things become more productized as the industry gets more integrated, so that designers and contractors work as one entity. They create and retain and refine intellectual property. And then they're going to clients with a brochure saying, hey, we have this product to offer, right? So we're not providing a service, we're providing a product. And that's an overall trend that's happening across the industry right now. So that's an area that, it's a change to business, and it requires a different way of thinking, a different way of collaborating, a different way of a different legal structure. And there's a whole bunch of technology and, other things that need to be investigated in order to jumpstart that sort of initiative. Offsite construction and mod. These are areas that contractors are in the driver's seat to initiate, but they don't necessarily have the experience to be able to manage it in a manufacturing environment. So these are interesting things, and there's a tremendous amount of information out of the industry. There are all sorts of associations focused on these different subjects. So, if you're stuck at home and thinking about what you can do to mature your business, there's quite a bit of information available to you through the internet.
Yeah, that resonates super hard with me, because I see with the company right now where we're catching up on a lot of things that we never have the time to do when we're 100%. And right now there are parts of the orgs that have a bit more time as the volume is a bit more quiet right now. And they're able to catch up and finally do the things that we've wanted to do for 2 years, but we've never got to.
Yeah, clean out your inbox.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's just it better be perfect in a week or something like that.
Yeah.
No, that makes a ton of sense. I think there's a way to look at the situation right now as an extra hardship on the industry that actually will further separate the companies that have been preparing hard over the last few years and the companies that are just have had issues evolving their processes. We talk a lot about strategy versus execution. And as you said, a lot of the things you're talking about are not new. They've been around for 5, 10, 20 years for some of them. But the only thing is they've never been implemented necessarily efficiently by some of those companies. How do you agree with that strategy versus execution bias, or in our case, execution bias or strategy?
I don't know if I think strategy has got to be a living thing. You don't create a strategy and it sits on a shelf, right? So,
yeah.
Or the way you got to be constantly measuring. You can't manage what you can't measure. So you got to measure how you're executing, and then that's going to inform your strategy.
Yeah.
So I think the two things they're separate things, but they are closely. They should be married, right? And I think these days, an area that we're seeing companies really invest in and really think about is overall data strategy, which is, it's not a new concept. It's business analytics. If you don't know where your project is in real time, then you can't go in and prevent a bad thing from happening. You don't know your numbers. You don't know where your project is. You don't know if the project manager's, spinning the results in the field, right? So, connecting all these digital platforms on a job site that measure transactional information, that you can measure progress, Fieldwire as an example. Obviously, you're tracking all sorts of issues. You're tracking activities. You're tracking how quickly things get closed out. that's valuable data that can be pulled into an overall data strategy so you can measure your business. So if your strategy needs to be a living document that kind of works in concert with how you're measuring performance on a job site, so you can be constantly adjusting your direction and steering.
Good. I mean, any closing thoughts on I'm a mid-sized general contractor, or maybe I'm a big general contractor right now, that's dealing with the situation. What are the 2-3 things I really need to focus on right now before, like, to go through this as well as possible?
Well, number one thing is take care of your people. You know, like you got to really pay attention to not your labor and your temporary workforce, but your permanent workforce as well. You know, this is where the rubber meets the road when it really comes down to it. You got to take care of your employees and make sure that they're safe, first of all. And in the event that you're in a crunch and you're in a slowdown, really, like, you really got to think through the value of the people. And if you've got the capacity to weather the storm, you know, keep your people, put them to work, have them focus on innovation, have them retool the business, have them, you know, do something productive that's going to improve the business and prepare for when the economy turns around, which it will in short order. And when things do turn around, they're going to move very, very quickly. So number one, definitely take care of your people. Number two, buy Fieldwire. It's a great product. You know, I don't know if that helps or not, but no, you got to, I think this is not, if you're slowing down, now's an opportunity to really think about your business and think about your technology stack, and as it relates to your business processes and people, because those 3 things they're joined at the hip. Now's an opportunity to kind of look around, and you know, it's rare that you have a pause in a busy business, where you're profitable and making a lot of money, and you're constantly just dealing with the avalanche of opportunities. This is an opportunity to look around, do some R&D, access the information that is at your fingertips. There's a lot of information out there. There's experts out there that are available to help. Think about your business and think about opportunities to improve efficiency. And I think there's going to be a trend too towards you're rethinking safety, you know, on projects. Like, we can't just think about you know, what's happening with workers and how they're performing their work, you know, physically. We also have to think about infectious disease control, you know, more broadly. And, you know, if we can really develop a good strategy around keeping people safe, but keeping them productive, then that will allow the workforce to get back to work sooner. And I think technology has a really big role to play in that. If you look at South Korea and you study what really allowed them to flatten their curve, it was a data strategy. It was data scientists that were tracking the movements of basically the whole population, and then basically backsighting exposure, and then prioritizing testing. And that is the root of all that is data strategy. So I think, you know, as a society, we have to be a little bit more open to having our locations tracked and monitored as it relates to controlling infectious diseases. And I think as an industry, we're going to have to be open to that as well. We need to understand where people are, how they're being exposed to each other. We have to create gateways in every workplace to ensure that people coming onto the job site are healthy and don't have fevers and other things that we can do. Potentially, hopefully, we can get to a point where testing is, you can do it on your iPhone in about 30 seconds. But in the meantime, we have to figure out strategies on how to get back to work sooner. I think it's extremely important for our workers who want to get paid for what they do and put food on their table. It's important for the economy, and it's you know, what we do in this industry. Like, we build civilization, we build shelter. It's a primary thing that everyone needs, and we need to continue doing it. So I think thinking about how we get back to work sooner and how we're going to deal with that, the avalanche of work that's going to be dropped on the industry, I think that's the other thing you got to think about.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a ton of sense. I mean, you see countries like Taiwan that reacted very, very early, I think, because they got hit super hard when I think it was SARS that hit them pretty hard. And so they started doing like just thermal imaging like all the time. They started producing masks at the very beginning of the epidemic, and they're already in a state that's way safer than most of the other countries. So I think taking it super seriously right now is probably the fastest way to get the industry back.
It's really an analogy for the construction industry as well, because projects go the same way. The first job you do, it goes lousy, and the next job you're like, oh, I think we should use BIM on this project, or I think we should use some technology to help us deal with these projects so we do better next time. And I think North America we're going through the first pandemic, and I think the next one's going to go a lot smoother. We're going to learn a lot here.
Yeah.
Yeah, challenging times.
Well, on that bombshell, we're gonna cut it there. So once again, that was Tom, who's the founder of Wired Construction and the CEO of CanBIM. And once again, thanks for Ray for putting these together for the company. And
great, guys.
Looking forward to talk to you soon again, Tom.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom.
Take care. Wash your hands. Don't touch your face.
Exactly.